I still remember the day I found my dream home. After years of apartment living and saving every spare dollar, I finally had enough for a down payment on a modest house in Oak Ridge Estates. It was not the biggest property in the neighborhood, but it had everything I had ever wanted. A quiet street, mature trees providing dappled shade, and the crown jewel, a beautiful in-ground pool in the backyard. The realtor had mentioned something about a homeowners association, but she assured me it was reasonable. Just basic rules to keep property values up, she said, flipping through a slim binder of regulations. The monthly fees seemed fair for the well-maintained common areas and the security gate at the neighborhood entrance. I signed on the dotted line without hesitation, already imagining summer evenings floating in my own private oasis. The first 6 months in Oak Ridge Estates were everything I had hoped for. My neighbors welcomed me with homemade cookies and invitations to weekend barbecues. The retired couple next door gave me gardening tips for maintaining the flower beds. The family across the street had teenagers who offered to mow my lawn for pocket money. It felt like I had found not just a house, but a community. I took maintaining my pool seriously from day one. I attended a pool maintenance class at the local community college, invested in quality equipment, and established a strict weekly cleaning schedule. The previous owners had neglected it somewhat, so I spent nearly $4,000 on repairs and upgrades. By the time summer arrived, my backyard sparkled like a resort advertisement. Neighbors would comment on how clear the water looked or how well I kept up with maintenance. I felt proud whenever someone complimented my little slice of paradise. The annual HOA board elections happened that September, and I did not pay much attention. I had only attended one meeting so far and found it dull but generally reasonable. The current board members seemed fair and focused on actual neighborhood issues rather than petty complaints. The election results came in a newsletter. Several incumbent members retained their positions, and 2 new board members were welcomed. One of those new names was Karen Henderson, who had moved into the large corner house 3 months prior. I first met Karen at the neighborhood Halloween party. She wore an expensive-looking outfit and carried a designer purse that she placed carefully away from the punch bowl. She introduced herself as a new board member and began asking surprisingly detailed questions about my home renovations. She seemed particularly interested in my pool. "Do you have the proper permits for all those pool upgrades?" she asked, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "The HOA has strict regulations about exterior modifications." "Yes, I followed all the guidelines," I replied, somewhat taken aback by her interrogation at what was supposed to be a social event. "Good, good," she nodded, scanning my property from across the street. "We just want to make sure everyone is in compliance. I have been put in charge of pool and exterior regulations, you know." Something about her tone made me uncomfortable, but I brushed it off. It was only as winter turned to spring that I began noticing subtle changes in the HOA enforcement. New flyers appeared on doorsteps with updated guidelines. The neighborhood newsletter included more warnings about compliance and increased fines for violations. And somehow, Karen Henderson seemed to be at the center of it all. The first sign of trouble came during the Memorial Day block party. I had invited several neighbors to enjoy hamburgers and cold drinks in my backyard. As people mingled around the pool, Karen appeared at my side, plastic cup of lemonade in hand. "Your pool has a lovely shape," she said, studying the kidney-shaped outline. "But have you considered updating the tile border? The current style is quite outdated. The Henderson Community Pool just installed beautiful Italian marble." Before I could respond, she continued, "And I notice you are using a standard chlorine system. The HOA is strongly encouraging saltwater conversions, much better for property values. I smiled politely. I am happy with my setup for now. The system works perfectly, and I just invested in maintenance last year. Karen pursed her lips. Well, we all need to do our part to keep Oak Ridge Estates prestigious. I will be proposing some updated pool guidelines at the next HOA meeting. You should attend. True to her word, the HOA meeting the following week included a special presentation on aquatic feature standards. Karen stood at the front with a PowerPoint presentation showing acceptable and unacceptable pool features. Somehow, nearly every example of unacceptable features looked suspiciously like elements of my pool. 3 days later, an official-looking envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a violation notice citing non-compliant pool tile edging and unauthorized chemical treatment system. The notice gave me 30 days to make changes or face a fine of $500. I called the HOA office immediately, asking to speak with someone about the violation. The administrator sounded sympathetic, but explained that the regulations had indeed been updated at the recent meeting. But these updates seemed targeted specifically at my pool, I argued. My setup was completely compliant when I purchased the house. I understand your frustration, the administrator replied. But the board voted unanimously on the new standards. Perhaps you could request a variance or extension at the next meeting. That evening, my neighbor Tom stopped by while walking his dog. He shuffled uncomfortably when I mentioned the violation notice. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice despite us being alone in my driveway. "You should know that Karen has been talking about your pool at her dinner parties. My wife and I were invited last week, and Karen spent 20 minutes complaining about how your substandard pool maintenance could affect her property value." I was stunned, but my pool is immaculate. I spend hours every week maintaining it. Tom nodded. Everyone knows that. But Karen moved here from a country club community where every house had professional landscapers and pool services. She thinks anything less is bringing down the neighborhood. The next day, I decided to address the issue directly. I knocked on Karen's door, violation notice in hand. She answered wearing tennis whites, appearing slightly annoyed at the interruption. "Karen, I would like to discuss this violation notice. My pool was fully compliant when I purchased my home, and I have maintained it perfectly." She examined her manicured nails. "The standards have been updated. As a board member, I cannot make exceptions. Rules are rules." "But these changes seem designed specifically to target my property," I pressed. Her smile tightened. "That is a serious accusation. The board considers all properties equally. Perhaps you simply need to invest more in proper maintenance. Quality has a price, after all." The dismissal in her tone was unmistakable. As I walked away, I heard her calling someone on her phone, laughing about some people not understanding neighborhood standards. The following month's HOA meeting was even worse. Karen had prepared a full presentation on neighborhood aquatic hazards, featuring thinly disguised photos of my property. Though she never mentioned me by name, her examples of concerning pool maintenance practices were clearly directed at my home. When I tried to speak during the public comment period, the board president, now clearly aligned with Karen, limited my time to 60 seconds. As I walked back to my seat, I noticed the neighborhood had become divided. Some neighbors avoided eye contact, while others gave me sympathetic glances. That night, I stood at my kitchen window, looking out at my beautifully maintained pool gleaming under the moonlight. The sanctuary I had worked so hard to create now felt like contested territory. Something had changed in Oak Ridge Estates, and I was clearly in someone's crosshairs. On a crisp Tuesday morning in early June, I found another envelope from the HOA in my mailbox. Unlike the standard white envelopes used for monthly newsletters, this one was made of heavy cream stationery with the HOA logo embossed in gold. My stomach tightened as I sliced it open at my kitchen counter. The letter inside was printed on official HOA letterhead with Karen Henderson's signature at the bottom. Her title now read Vice President and Special Events Coordinator. I scanned the contents, my disbelief growing with each paragraph. "Dear homeowner," it began formally. "The Oak Ridge Estates HOA is pleased to announce that the neighborhood common areas will be hosting the wedding reception of Christina Henderson, daughter of board member Karen Henderson, on Saturday, June 24th. This community celebration will showcase the exceptional amenities and spirit of our neighborhood to distinguished guests from across the region." I continued reading, still unsure why this required special notification to me specifically. Then I reached the fourth paragraph. "As part of our reception planning, we have identified your property as featuring an amenity that would enhance the experience of our wedding guests. The board formally requests that you make your swimming pool available to reception guests between the hours of 3:00 p.m. and 9:00 p.m. on the date of the event." I nearly dropped the letter. They were requesting, no, practically demanding, that I open my private pool to strangers for a wedding reception. I read further, my hands beginning to shake. "To ensure proper preparation, please complete the following tasks prior to the event. 1. Maintain water pH between 7.2 and 7.8. 2. Heat pool to a minimum of 82 degrees Fahrenheit. 3. Remove all personal items from the pool area. 4. Provide a minimum of 12 pool towels. And 5. Ensure pool furniture is clean and adequately arranged for guest comfort." The letter continued with detailed instructions about chemical treatments and suggested I make myself scarce during the reception hours to allow guests to fully enjoy the amenity without awkwardness. The final paragraph mentioned that compliance would be noted favorably in future HOA considerations, while refusal could result in review of outstanding violations. I read the letter 3 times, convinced there must be some misunderstanding. No reasonable person could expect a homeowner to turn over their private property for a stranger's wedding reception. I immediately called the HOA office, but the administrator informed me that Karen was handling all wedding-related communications personally. That afternoon, I ran into my neighbor Lisa at the mailbox. Her expression turned sympathetic when I mentioned the letter. "Oh, you got one too?" she asked, although mine just asked to use my driveway for additional parking. "Has Karen actually told people they can use my pool?" I asked. Lisa looked uncomfortable. "My sister works at the country club where she is having the ceremony. Karen has been telling everyone about the poolside reception in her exclusive neighborhood. She has been showing photos of your backyard to her friends." My blood ran cold. Photos of my property, how did she get those? "Probably during the spring inspection," Lisa said. "You know, when they check for violations. She has been a board member for months now." I spent the rest of the day alternating between disbelief and outrage. By evening, I had resolved to confront Karen directly again. I walked the 3 blocks to her house, letter clutched in my hand. When she opened the door, I held up the letter. "Karen, there must be some mistake. You cannot possibly expect me to open my private property to wedding guests I do not even know." Karen did not appear surprised by my visit. She leaned against her doorframe, arms crossed. The HOA charter gives the board authority to request reasonable accommodation for community events. Your pool is the nicest residential one in the neighborhood. Consider it an honor. An honor, I repeated, incredulous. This is not a request. This is a list of demands about my private property. She waved her hand dismissively. Christina has always dreamed of a poolside reception. The community pool is too public, and this is a way for you to finally contribute positively to neighborhood events. Everyone knows you rarely entertain. That is beside the point, I insisted. You cannot force me to host part of your daughter's wedding. Karen's pleasant facade cracked slightly. I have already included your pool area in the invitations. The RSVP cards have already been returned. Do you have any idea how elite some of these guests are? That is not my concern, I said firmly. I never agreed to this. Her expression hardened. Listen carefully. The board has been very patient about your ongoing violations. That patience can quickly run out. There are serious fines associated with noncompliance, and I would hate to see those drain your bank account the way your outdated pool drains our property values. The threat hung in the air between us. Before I could respond, she added with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Think of it as being a good neighbor. The reception is in 3 weeks. I will send someone to assess the pool condition next week. As she closed the door in my face, I stood there seething. Karen Henderson had crossed a line, and it was becoming clear that she viewed HOA regulations not as community standards, but as weapons to be wielded against those who did not conform to her vision. That night I could not sleep. The audacity of Karen's demand kept replaying in my mind. At 2:00 a.m., I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, researching HOA regulations and homeowner rights. There had to be limits to what an HOA could force a homeowner to do. I found the Oak Ridge Estates HOA charter online and pored through it. Nothing in the document gave the board authority to commandeer private property for personal events. The community events clause Karen had referenced applied only to common areas that all residents paid for through their dues. The next morning, I called Ronald, a neighbor 3 doors down who worked as a real estate attorney. I had helped him install a basketball hoop for his kids last summer, and he had always been friendly. "This is outrageous," Ronald said after I explained the situation. HOAs have authority over external appearance and maintenance standards, but they absolutely cannot force you to allow strangers onto your property or in your pool. That would be like them demanding to use your living room for a board meeting. Relief washed over me, so I can legally refuse. Absolutely, he confirmed. And if they try to fine you for it, you would have clear grounds for legal action against the HOA. If you want, I can draft a formal response letter citing the relevant property laws. Armed with this knowledge, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. But as the day progressed, my relief gave way to indignation. Karen needed to learn a lesson about boundaries and respect. Simply refusing her demand did not seem sufficient. She would likely find some other way to retaliate through her position on the board. I invited a few trusted neighbors over for drinks that evening to get their perspective. As we sat around my patio table, I showed them Karen's letter. "She tried to get us to offer guest parking in our driveway," said Min from across the street. "When we explained we have 3 cars of our own, she suggested we could park on the street during the reception. She asked if our teenage daughters would serve drinks," added Diana, who lived next to the community center. "Unpaid, of course, for the community spirit." As we shared stories, it became clear that Karen had been throwing her weight around the entire neighborhood, using her daughter's wedding as an excuse to impose on everyone. What had started as my personal issue had actually affected the whole community. You should just tell her no and document everything in case she tries to retaliate, Ronald advised sensibly. Or, said Diana with a mischievous smile, you could say yes, but make it something she would never want to use. What do you mean? I asked. Diana shrugged. I do not know exactly, but malicious compliance can be satisfying. Like, what if you technically made the pool available but not in the way she expects? We brainstormed increasingly outlandish ideas, letting neighborhood kids use it first so it would be crowded, adding excessive chlorine so no one would want to swim, filling it with floating rubber ducks. You could just fill it with Jello, Joey, Min's husband, joked as he reached for another beer. Technically still a pool, just not water. The group laughed, but I froze, the idea crystallizing in my mind. It was absurd, impractical, and potentially a massive undertaking, yet absolutely perfect in its malicious compliance. That is actually genius, I whispered, then louder. That is actually genius. My friends looked at me with confusion turning to amusement as they realized I was serious. You cannot actually fill a pool with Jello, Min said practically. Do you know how much gelatin that would take? I can calculate it, I replied, already pulling out my phone's calculator. My pool holds about 15,000 gallons, if I convert that to quarts for standard gelatin packages. As I worked through the calculations, the group gathered around, offering suggestions and refining the plan. Ronald, ever the attorney, verified that nothing in the HOA regulations specifically prohibited alternative materials in private pools. Diana looked up industrial food suppliers who could provide the necessary quantity of unflavored gelatin. I stayed up late that night after my friends left, researching the logistics. Industrial gelatin came in large quantities. The cost would be significant but not prohibitive, especially considering the satisfaction it would bring. I would need help with the mixing and preparation, as the volume was enormous. Around midnight, I placed several large orders from different suppliers to avoid suspicion, using overnight shipping to ensure delivery with enough time before the wedding. As I entered my credit card information, I felt a strange sense of calm determination. This was not just about revenge. It was about standing up to a bully who had turned a pleasant community into her personal kingdom. I went to bed that night with a clear plan and a slight smile. Karen Henderson had demanded my pool be available for her daughter's wedding, and available it would be, just not in the way she expected. 5 days before the wedding, a delivery truck rumbled down our quiet street at 7:30 a.m. The driver looked confused as he checked his clipboard. I have a delivery of industrial food-grade gelatin, 200 pounds total. Is this correct? I nodded, trying to appear casual despite my racing heart. Yes, that is for me, a special project. The driver raised his eyebrows but said nothing as he began unloading large boxes onto my driveway. As I helped move them into my garage, curtains twitched in neighboring houses. By mid-morning, I had received 3 separate deliveries: gelatin, large mixing containers, and several propane burners for heating water. Mary from next door stopped by while walking her dog. "Spring cleaning?" she asked, eyeing the boxes stacked in my garage. "Something like that," I replied vaguely, "just working on a project." News travels fast in neighborhoods like ours. By afternoon, I received a text from Lisa. "Karen is asking questions about your deliveries. Be careful." I needed to work quickly. The gelatin would take time to set properly, and I needed everything ready before the wedding day. I called the friends who had been present when the idea was born, and to my relief, they eagerly volunteered to help. That evening, my backyard transformed into a covert operations center. Ronald brought his truck with additional propane tanks. Diana arrived with her husband and 3 large cooking pots. Min and Joey brought extension cords and outdoor burners they used for their annual crawfish boil. "This is the craziest thing I have ever been part of," Joey laughed as we unboxed the gelatin packages. Each box contained large bags of unflavored, industrial-strength gelatin powder. The first step was draining some water from the pool to make room for the volume the gelatin would add. I had calculated that we needed to remove about 20% of the water. As the pool pump hummed, we began the process of measuring and mixing. The formula was simple, but the scale was enormous. 1 pound of gelatin powder for every 4 gallons of water, mixed first with cold water to hydrate, then dissolved in boiling water, then added to the pool. The challenge was heating enough water to dissolve the gelatin properly before adding it to the cool pool water. We set up 4 stations around the pool, each with a propane burner heating a large pot of water. Once the water reached boiling point, we added the prehydrated gelatin mixture, stirring continuously until it dissolved completely. Then, carefully, we poured the clear liquid into different sections of the pool. "Make sure to distribute it evenly," I directed. "We do not want clumps or unset sections." The process was exhausting. By midnight, we had only managed to mix and add about 1/4 of the gelatin. My back ached from stirring, and we were all sweating despite the cool evening air. But there was a sense of camaraderie and purpose that kept us going. "The night shift has arrived," called a voice from my side gate. Tom appeared with 3 more neighbors I recognized from HOA meetings, all people who had experienced Karen's overreach in some form. They brought coffee, sandwiches, and willing hands. With the additional help, we established a rhythm. One team hydrated the gelatin with cold water. Another team boiled water and dissolved the mixture. A third team carefully added it to the pool while monitoring the temperature. By sunrise, we had added nearly all 200 pounds of gelatin to the pool. The water looked different already, slightly thicker and with a distinctive sheen. But it would need time to set properly. According to my research, a mass this size would require at least 48 hours in temperatures below 70 degrees to set fully. "We need to cool it down," I said, exhausted but determined, "and keep it covered so no one sees it before it is ready." Ronald had thought ahead and brought several bags of ice, which we dispersed across the surface. We also set up my patio umbrella and several tarps to shade the pool from direct sunlight. Finally, we covered the entire pool with the winter cover I normally used during off-season months. As my friends departed, each gave me a conspiratorial nod or thumbs up. We had formed a bond through this absurd, yet strangely significant act of defiance. Diana hugged me at the door. "Update us tomorrow on how it is setting," she whispered, "and let us know if Karen comes snooping." Sure enough, Karen appeared at my front door that afternoon. I answered, aware that I looked exhausted from the all-night operation. "I noticed quite a bit of activity at your house last night," she said, attempting to peer around me into my home. "I hope you are preparing the pool area as requested." "The pool will be ready for the wedding," I replied truthfully. "Everything is being handled according to plan." She seemed both surprised and pleased by my compliance. "Excellent. I will send my event coordinator tomorrow to verify arrangements." "That will not be necessary," I said quickly. "The pool area is undergoing special treatment until Saturday for optimal guest experience." Karen looked suspicious but nodded. Very well, but I expect everything to be perfect on Saturday. The reception starts at 3:00 p.m. sharp. After she left, I hurried to check on the pool. Lifting one corner of the cover, I could see the transformation beginning. The liquid was thickening visibly, with a translucent quality that caught the light differently than water. I tested it with a pool skimmer, watching as it penetrated the surface with increasing resistance. By the following morning, the consistency had changed dramatically. When I pressed the pool skimmer against the surface, it depressed slightly before bouncing back. By that evening, it had set into a gigantic, wobbling mass of translucent gelatin. I invited my co-conspirators over for the grand reveal. As I pulled back the cover, gasps and laughter erupted around me. What had once been my swimming pool was now the world's largest gelatin mold. 15,000 gallons of wobbly, semi-transparent substance that quivered when the cover was removed. Joey reached out to touch it, pressing his hand against the surface. It yielded slightly before returning to shape. "It is perfect," he whispered in awe. "Absolutely perfect." We carefully replaced the cover. The trap was set. Now we just had to wait for wedding day. Saturday dawned clear and beautiful, as if nature itself approved of my plan. I woke early after a restless night, too anxious to sleep. From my bedroom window, I could see activity already beginning at the community center and common areas. Workers were setting up white tents, arranging flowers, and placing elegant chairs in rows. I made coffee and watched as the wedding preparations continued. By noon, the entire neighborhood had transformed. White ribbons decorated lamp posts. Luxury cars began arriving, parking in designated areas, including some neighbors' driveways, as Karen had arranged. Caterers bustled between the community center kitchen and the reception tents. My co-conspirators texted throughout the morning. "Wedding ceremony starting now at the country club. Lisa." "Reception setup looks expensive. Karen keeps pointing toward your house. Tom." "Hang in there, we are all nearby if you need backup. Ronald." At 2:30 p.m., I removed the pool cover for the final time. The gelatin had set perfectly, firm enough to hold its shape, but with that distinctive wobble that made it unmistakably not water. I arranged the pool furniture as requested in Karen's letter, and even set out the 12 towels she had demanded, placing them neatly on each lounge chair. Just before 3:00 p.m., I heard string quartet music begin playing from the community center. From my kitchen window, I watched as elegantly dressed guests began migrating from the ceremony site toward the reception area. Servers circulated with champagne flutes among clusters of people in formal attire. At 3:45 p.m., I saw exactly what I had been waiting for: Karen, resplendent in a silver mother-of-the-bride dress, gathering a group of guests. Even from a distance, I could see her gesturing enthusiastically toward my house. The bride, a younger version of Karen in a white dress, stood nearby with her new husband and several friends in matching attire. I stepped outside onto my back patio, heart pounding but resolved. Within minutes, I heard the side gate to my yard open. Karen led the procession, speaking loudly about the exclusive pool area she had arranged for guests. Behind her trailed at least 20 people in formal wear, champagne glasses in hand, following like obedient ducklings. Karen froze when she saw me standing there. She quickly recovered, smiling tightly. "Here is our gracious neighbor who has offered his pool for our use today. Everything looks lovely." She moved toward the pool, guests following behind her. "Now, everyone, feel free to enjoy this wonderful amenity. We have towels and—" Karen stopped mid-sentence as she reached the pool edge. The bride pushed forward to see what had caused her mother's sudden silence. For one perfect moment, the only sound was the distant string quartet. Then gasps and murmurs rippled through the group as they registered what they were seeing. Not the sparkling blue water they had expected, but a massive expanse of wobbly, translucent gelatin gently catching the afternoon light. Karen turned to me, her face transitioning from shock to rage in seconds. "What have you done to your pool?" she hissed, keeping her voice low enough that the more distant guests could not hear. "I made it available for your daughter's wedding, exactly as requested," I replied calmly. "Your letter never specified what should be in the pool, only that it should be available." The bride stepped forward, her expression a mixture of confusion and growing horror. "Mother, what is going on? You said there would be swimming." Karen's face flushed crimson. "This is vandalism. This is deliberate sabotage of my daughter's wedding." "Actually," I said, loud enough for all the guests to hear, "this is my private property which I never authorized for use in your wedding. The letter you sent demanding my pool be made available had no legal standing whatsoever. But rather than cause a scene on your daughter's special day, I decided to technically comply. The pool is available. It is just filled with gelatin rather than water." Several guests began laughing nervously. One older man in the back actually applauded. The bride burst into tears, while her new husband looked like he was struggling not to laugh. "I will call the police," Karen threatened, pulling out her phone. "This is destruction of property or something." "It is my property," I reminded her. "And there is nothing in the HOA regulations specifying what a homeowner can or cannot put in their own pool." At that moment, Ronald stepped out from my house where he had been watching through the window. "As a real estate attorney, I can confirm that is correct. No laws or HOA regulations have been broken here." Karen jabbed her finger toward my chest. "You will pay for this. I will make sure the HOA fines you into bankruptcy. I will." Her rant was interrupted by the sound of someone slow clapping. We all turned to see Diana standing at the side gate with several other neighbors. "That is enough, Karen," she said firmly. "Everyone in this neighborhood is tired of your bullying. This stops now." The wedding guests began retreating awkwardly, muttering excuses about checking on the cake or needing another drink. The bride shot her mother a look of pure venom before storming off, her bridal party hurrying after her. Left with dwindling support, Karen gathered what dignity she could muster. "This is not over," she warned before turning on her heel and marching away. As she departed, I called after her, "Feel free to take some towels." I put out exactly 12 as requested. The story of the Jello pool incident spread through Oak Ridge Estates like wildfire. By Sunday morning, nearly everyone in the neighborhood had heard some version of what happened. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from neighbors both congratulating me and asking if the rumors were really true. An emergency HOA meeting was called for Monday evening. The community center was packed beyond capacity, with residents standing against walls and spilling out into the hallway. I arrived early, securing a seat near the front where I could clearly see the board members' faces. Karen sat at the board table looking composed, but with a tightness around her eyes that betrayed her tension. The board president opened the meeting with a weak attempt at neutrality. "We are here to discuss the unfortunate incident that occurred during a private event this weekend," he began. From the back of the room, someone called out, "You mean when Karen tried to commandeer private property for her daughter's wedding?" Several neighbors applauded. The board president struggled to maintain order as residents began sharing their own stories of Karen's overreach, violation notices for minor infractions, special rules that seemed to apply only to certain homeowners, and the overall hostile atmosphere that had developed since she joined the board. When it was my turn to speak, I approached the microphone calmly. I had brought copies of Karen's original letter, which I distributed to the other board members. "I would like to clarify exactly what happened," I said. "Board member Henderson sent an official HOA letter demanding use of my private pool for her daughter's wedding reception. When I consulted with a real estate attorney, I confirmed that such demands have no legal standing. Rather than create a public conflict, I chose to comply technically while protecting my property rights. At no point did I violate any HOA regulations." Karen interrupted, her voice sharp. "The board has authority to request reasonable accommodations for community events." "Your daughter's wedding was not a community event," countered Diana from her seat. "It was a private party that you were hosting, and you did not request, you demanded." The meeting continued for over 2 hours as neighbors voiced their frustrations. What had begun as my individual stand against Karen's unreasonable demands had catalyzed a community-wide reckoning with how the HOA had been operating. By the end of the meeting, a motion was introduced to restructure the board and review all recent regulation changes. The vote was overwhelming. Karen and 2 of her closest allies on the board were removed from their positions. New interim members were elected, with Ronald nominated to help review the HOA bylaws for clarity and fairness. As the meeting adjourned, neighbors surrounded me with words of support and offers to help restore my pool. Karen departed quickly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The following weekend became an impromptu neighborhood restoration party. Removing hundreds of pounds of gelatin from a swimming pool proved to be almost as challenging as putting it in, but with many hands helping, the work went quickly. Neighbors brought pumps, hoses, and cleaning supplies. Others provided food and drinks for the workers. Children watched in fascination as chunks of gelatin were scooped out and carted away. By Sunday afternoon, my pool had been completely cleaned, refilled, and properly balanced with chemicals. The entire neighborhood had participated in some way, creating bonds stronger than had existed before the incident. 1 month later, with my pool restored to its former glory, I hosted the first official neighborhood pool party. Nearly everyone attended, bringing potluck dishes and a renewed sense of community spirit. The new HOA board presented revised guidelines that focused on reasonable maintenance standards rather than micromanagement. Karen put her house on the market 2 weeks after the wedding. Rumors said she was moving to a gated community with stricter rules. Few neighbors attended her goodbye gathering. As I watched children playing in my pool that summer evening, surrounded by neighbors who had become true friends through adversity, I reflected on what the experience had taught me. Standing up to bullies is rarely easy, and sometimes requires creativity rather than direct confrontation. Communities grow stronger when people unite against unreasonable authority.